Welcome everyone to this installment of the Wisdom of the Scholastic series.
It's great to be exploring this.
Today, we're really getting into the mind of Saint Anselm of Canterbury. Specifically, we'll be looking at his really foundational work, the Monologion.
That's right. And Anselm's goal with the Monologion, it was, well, pretty bold for its time. He wanted to meditate on the being of God and related ideas, but using reason alone.
Reason alone, yeah. Setting aside direct appeals to Scripture, initially at least.
Exactly. He was trying to establish these fundamental truths about God just through, logical investigation, using what he felt were common proofs, simple arguments. It's a really fascinating look at early philosophical theology.
It really is. And, the backstory is interesting, too. It wasn't just him deciding to write a treatise out of the blue.
No, not at all. Apparently, some of his brethren who were used to hearing him talk about these ideas, they really pushed him to write it down, like in a meditative style they could follow.
And he was hesitant, wasn't he?
He was. He apparently found it quite difficult, this idea of making these really deep thoughts accessible and sort of practical in written form.
Yeah, I can imagine. And he even thought people might dismiss it.
He did. He expected some contempt, maybe. But surprisingly, it was actually well received. It circulated quite a bit, even through private copies. So clearly his argument struck a chord.
That must have been quite validating. But it's also key to remember, even with this focus on reason, he didn't see himself as breaking from tradition, did he?
Not at all. He firmly believed his work lined up with the Catholic Fathers, especially St. Augustine. He actually told readers, go compare this with Augustine's On the Trinity.
Right. Which really shows that scholastic goal of, faith-seeking, understanding, integrating reason with faith.
Precisely. And the structure of the Monologion reflects this meditative goal. It's presented as him thinking things through, like a solitary reflection, debating questions he says he hadn't really formally tackled before.
And the preface is important there.
Oh, absolutely crucial. He stresses that you need to understand his intention and his method before judging the work, basically saying, get where I'm coming from before you decide you disagree.
Okay, so for our session today, as part of the Wisdom of the Scholastic series, what we want to do is unpack some of those really foundational arguments from the first few chapters.
Yeah, focusing on how he argues for the existence and the nature of what he calls a supreme being, something that's the best, the greatest, the highest thing there is.
And crucially, how he builds that case using only reason, at least as presented in these opening sections. Okay, so let's start with chapter 1, the existence of a supreme, good, and great being. Where does he begin?
Well, he starts with something that seems, pretty straightforward, an observation. Everyone desires things they perceive as good. We all want good things.
Okay, simple enough.
But then he asks, okay, if we all desire good things, shouldn't we think about what makes them good? What's the source of this goodness we're all drawn to?
Right, like there must be some underlying cause or reason for their goodness.
Exactly. And that leads him to this idea of degrees of goodness. He points out, look, some things are better than others. Some actions are more just than others. There are levels.
Like comparing two apples or two acts of kindness.
Precisely. And his argument is, if things share this quality goodness but in different degrees, that goodness must come from something that's fundamentally the same source in all cases. It can't be something totally different, making each thing good.
He uses an analogy with justice, right?
He does. He says, look, we call different actions just because they all participate in some way in justness itself. So similarly, good things participate in some fundamental goodness.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But then doesn't he anticipate an objection? Like, what about things that seem good in one sense but maybe bad overall?
Ah, yes. The swift horse versus the swift robber example. Someone might say, well, strength and speed are good qualities in both a horse and a robber.
So how does he handle that?
He refines the idea of good. He says, okay, we need to distinguish. The horse's strength and speed are good because they're useful. They serve a good purpose. The robber's strength and speed, while maybe impressive in themselves, are directed towards harm.
So he's focusing on things that are good, either because they're genuinely useful in a positive way or because they possess some kind of honorable character.
Exactly. And his conclusion from all this is that all these truly good things, the useful and the honorable, they all get their goodness from one single ultimate source.
And that source itself must be.
It must be good, not just participate in goodness, but be good through its own essence. It has to be the supreme good because all other goodness comes from it.
And if it's supremely good,
then it must also be supremely great. It surpasses everything else in goodness, therefore it's the highest being that exists. That's the core of chapter 1.
Okay, so chapter 2 then picks up on that, but maybe shifts the emphasis slightly to greatness.
It does. It builds right on that conclusion. But he's careful to define what he means by great. It's not about size, is it?
Right, not physical bigness.
No, definitely not. He says greatness here means that quality where the more something has of it, the better or more worthy it is. He uses wisdom as an example.
Okay, so more wisdom makes something intrinsically better, more worthy.
Exactly. It's about intrinsic worth or excellence.
Yeah, and how does he connect this back to the supreme good from chapter 1?
Well, he basically asserts that something can't be supremely great in this sense unless it's also supremely good. The two are linked.
I see, so the ultimate greatness requires ultimate goodness.
Pretty much. So he reaffirms the conclusion from chapter 1. There must be one being that is both the greatest and the best, the highest of all existing things. It's like approaching the same peak from a slightly different path.
Got it. So chapters 1 and 2 establish this supremely good and great being. Then chapter 3 seems to broaden the scope even more, right? To existence itself.
It does. He takes the same kind of logical approach, but applies it to the sheer fact that things exist.
Okay, how does that argument run?
He starts with a dichotomy. Anything that exists either through something else or, well, through nothing.
And he dismisses the through nothing idea pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. He finds it inconceivable. Like, things don't just pop into existence from absolute nothingness. That violates basic reason, causality.
Seems fair. So everything exists through something. What are the options then?
He lays out two main possibilities. Either there's one ultimate reality or being through which everything else gets its existence, or there are multiple fundamental beings or sources of existence.
Okay. One source or many sources?
If there are many, he argues, then either these multiple sources somehow trace back to an even more fundamental single source, or they just exist independently, side by side, as it were.
And he argues against that plurality, doesn't he?
Oh.
Why?
Well, he sees problems with it. An unexplained plurality seems less rational than unity, and if they depend on something else, they aren't truly fundamental. He argues the most logical position is that there's a single being that is the source of all other existence.
And crucially, this single being exists.
Through itself. It doesn't depend on anything else for its existence. It's self-existent. This avoids an infinite regress, turtles all the way down, and provides a coherent ultimate explanation.
So this self-existent being, the source of all existence, must also be the supremely good and great being he already argued for.
Exactly. He concludes that this being, existing through itself, must exist in the highest possible way, possess existence to the maximum degree, and as the source of everything, it's also the source of all goodness and greatness. So it all points back to this one, highest of all existing beings.
It's a really tight logical progression he's building. Okay, so chapter 4 then brings in this idea of dignity and a preeminent nature. How does this fit?
Yeah, this chapter introduces a kind of hierarchy in reality. He just observes, look, things aren't all equal in value or dignity, as he puts it.
Like his examples.
Right. A horse is clearly superior in its nature to a piece of wood. A human is superior to a horse. There are obvious degrees of excellence or perfection in the world.
Okay, so we observe this hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
What does he argue from that?
He argues that reason tells us this hierarchy can't go on forever upwards. There can't be an infinite ladder of beings, each one superior to the last. Just like with causes, an infinite regress seems absurd.
So there must be a top, a highest nature.
There must be some nature that's so preeminent, so high up, that nothing is superior to it. A supreme nature.
And then he asks, is this supreme nature one thing, or could there be several equally supreme natures?
Exactly. He considers that possibility.
Yeah.
What if there are multiple beings, all equally at the top, sharing that supreme dignity?
How does he rule that out?
He argues, well, if they are truly equal, they must be equal through something. Either that something is their own essence, meaning they actually share one single essence, so they're really just one nature after all. Or they are equal because of some other shared cause or principle that's distinct from their individual essences. But if that were the case, then that shared cause would be superior to them, making them not truly supreme.
Because they'd be dependent on that other cause for their equality.
Precisely. It leads to a contradiction. So he concludes there can only be one such supreme nature, superior to all, inferior to none, the greatest and best.
And this one supreme nature must be what it is through itself.
Yes, reinforcing the earlier point. It exists through itself, is what it is through itself, and everything else derives its being and its level of dignity from it. This prevents the possibility of multiple competing supreme beings.
Wow. So putting these first few chapters together, Anselm is really laying down this very methodical, rational foundation, starting from common experience, desiring good, seeing degrees of things, and building logically towards this concept of a single, supreme, self-existent being who is the source of all goodness, greatness, existence, and dignity.
That's exactly it. It's a remarkable attempt to build up an understanding of God, or at least a supreme being, using just the tools of reason, step by logical step. It really sets the stage for everything else he discusses in the Monologion.
When you consider that logical rigor, that step-by-step approach he takes in just these first chapters, how do you see that groundwork influencing where he goes next in the book, like exploring God's attributes more specifically?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. Because he's established the reason, remember that there is this being, and it's supremely good, great, self-existent, the source of all. Well, now he has a rational basis to ask, what else must be true of such a being?
Right, like deducing properties from that core concept.
Exactly. The idea of self-existence, for example, is huge. That leads directly into discussions about God's eternity, God's immutability, God's necessity. The idea of supreme goodness underpins arguments about God's justice, mercy, and perfection. These initial chapters aren't just proofs of existence. They establish the kind of being whose nature he can then explore further using the same rational tools. They provide the premises for the rest of his deductions.
That makes sense. And thinking about today, for people studying theology or philosophy, what's the value in wrestling with these kinds of scholastic arguments like Anselm's? How does it help us now?
Well, I think there are a few things. First, it really forces you to sharpen your own thinking. Engaging with Anselm demands logical precision. You have to follow the steps, identify the premises, evaluate the inferences. That kind of vigor is invaluable, whatever your own final conclusions might be.
It disciplines the mind, in a way.
It does. Second, it helps us appreciate the deep intellectual tradition behind many theological concepts we might take for granted. Seeing how thinkers like Anselm arrived at certain ideas about God gives those ideas more depth, more context. It's not just about accepting doctrine, it's about understanding the rational attempts to articulate it. And third, I think it highlights this ongoing dialogue between faith and reason. Anselm is a prime example of someone deeply committed to faith, but also convinced that reason has a powerful role to play in understanding that faith. Engaging with him encourages us to think about how faith and reason interact in our own lives and studies today, even if our philosophical landscape looks very different. It prompts really good questions.
Absolutely. Well, this exploration has really just scratched the surface, the beginning steps of Anselm's rational ascent in the Monologion.
It really is just the start of his argument, but what a foundation he lays.
And it's just the start of our journey and the wisdom of the Scholastic series. We definitely encourage you, our listeners, to perhaps pick up the Monologion itself or other works from this incredibly rich Scholastic tradition.
There's so much there to engage with. We hope this discussion has given you a solid entry point into Anselm's thinking in these crucial early chapters.
Yes, indeed. And if you found this exploration valuable, please do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Clicking that notification bell helps you stay updated on our future discussions.
And please share your own thoughts, reflections, maybe even questions down in the comment section. We genuinely look forward to hearing your insights and continuing the conversation there.